And I got to make sure that everyone is admitted here. And it's fun to watch all these screens just popping on by. All right. Hang on 1 second here. So again, this is the second actually of our webinar series, and the first and well within our external audience. So again, if there are any glitches or technical difficulties that should arise, I do apologize in advance. I have muted and stopped the video feed for all participants in order for all to focus on the presenter, and as well as protect your privacy and your individual privacy. This webinar is being recorded and will be utilized by both the Aurora Chamber of Commerce and the Aurora Mental Health Center's internal and external audiences in order to continue supporting our community during this challenging time. To further protect your individual privacy, each of you have the ability to click on the 3 dots on the upper right hand of your individual screens and then rename yourself. You can even just put ... if that be the case in place. When we get to the question and answer section during the last 10 to 20 minutes of the webinar today, please direct all questions to me, Rick Jewell, via chat privately, and I will state your question to the presenter and all. This will promote more privacy as to who is asking the question, and if you choose to keep your name visible, that is fine as well. If you wish me to unmute your audio so you can ask the question directly, please state so in the private message that you send to me. The chat feature is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'm multitasking again here, sorry about that. Bottom of the Zoom screen, and it will open up the chat feature box to the right. It automatically defaults to everyone, and you are welcome to change that everyone to say Rick Jewell in order to send those to me privately. You may send questions throughout the presentation, however, they will not be asked until the Q&A time at the very end. At this moment, I'm going to share my screen again and turn it over to Dr. Dawn O'Neill, who is going to be our presenter today from the Aurora Mental Health Center. And we're very happy to have her with us. And I turn it over to you, Dawn.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So the topic today is about fear, isolation, and work-life balance. And I think this is a especially challenging time. Work-life balance is hard under ordinary circumstances, and we are certainly in extraordinary circumstances. So I want to talk about that. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what is new work-life balance? And when I think of new, I think we're in this new reality, this new normal. And we're working on trying to get some kind of equilibrium in the competing demands of work and personal life, which have, by the way, become so much more complicated, even in the past month, about the demands on both areas. So with working under the COVID-19 changes to our work, care must be taken to balance things, because it can be very easy, I think, for things to start to blur together and to not keep those nice boundaries around our career, family, friends, health, hobbies, education, and professional development. Could you move it again, please? All right. So the way I think of this is I think of it as a process. We have all been adjusting. If you're working from home during this period of shelter in place, that can be pretty daunting and isolating. For those of us who are used to being in an office or in some kind of work circumstances around our colleagues and peers, we're now home alone and connecting in new and different ways. And that isolation can add to fear and anxiety. And on the other side, if you are working in the community, the feel of the workplace certainly can be very emotionally charged. There's so many new safety precautions, even just the new one from Governor Polis about wearing a mask when you're out in public. It just gives a different feel to the environment. And so I think part of the coping is even just acknowledging that this is a process. And it's okay to have the emotions you're having, even as you're working towards stabilizing in this new normal. It's just to acknowledge that this is different and very unusual. And it's going to keep changing. Even right before we started this webinar, we were chatting about, well, what's going to happen in a week from now? Because Governor Polis put the shelter in place until the 26th, but we don't know what's going to be announced. So it's going to adjust again, and then it will probably adjust again, and giving ourselves permission to be okay with this adjustment and acknowledge that it's hard. Next slide, please. All right, so factors contributing to the struggle to get this work-life balance going. Increased responsibilities and tasks. So again, our work has changed. For those of us at Aurora Mental Health Center, many of us had to go home. It was a quick decision and learn how to function with Zoom and function with all sorts of telecommuting things that for me 2 months ago wouldn't have even been on my radar as skills I needed to develop. So my work becomes more complicated because I'm doing the usual work with a new task to doing the work. Longer hours. There might be an internal pressure due to fears about the economy. So people who are worried about their job security might pressure themselves even without even noticing that they're pressuring themselves to put in those longer hours. Increased responsibilities at home. Again, so I mentioned earlier, things are so much more complicated. People who have a lot of people at home. Everybody in my house is working from home. So it's just much more challenging. Next slide, please. Fatigue. So certainly stress can impact sleep. It can impact your health and wellness feelings. There may be a sense of loss. So many things right now. You see it in the news. You probably see it in your family. Time that was meant to be happening at this time of year is not happening. It could be prom for your kids. It could be graduation for people you know in high school or college. So there's lost feelings. And that sense of not being in control. And that's a really important thing we'll talk about in terms of how do you cope with that fear and isolation when there is a sense of, wow, I'm not in control. This virus is in control. Next one, please. Okay. So to get into the work-life balance, one of the things I think is super important to keep in mind is that there's no perfect way to do this and get there. It's not like this one size fit all. As I've watched my colleagues and I'm a manager and I've watched my staff adjust, I've noticed everybody's adjusting in a different way. So people are finding their new normal and they're having to create a different avenue for what that is, and that's okay. The new normal that works for me doesn't mean it's the new normal that works for one of my staff members. And so when I'm coaching them, it's like, okay, what's the new normal that's going to work for you? And so that's part of it. And that's one of the ways to cope with the fear is to allow yourself to find the balance that works for you. You don't have to achieve the balance that works for your best friend or your peer or colleague. And along those lines, that's where mindfulness is such a key skill. To notice what's going on and notice what you're doing. And as you develop your routines, when you're working, you work. And when it's time to unplug, it's time to set it aside. And that can be, for those who do end up with the work part that's at home, that can be quite challenging because your home is now your office. And that can be tempting to not fully let aside your work. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, mindfulness is key. And mindfulness is that skill of being aware of the present moment. Intentionally living in the present moment, not judging it, and focusing on being effective. So I'm going to be talking a little bit down the road here about how you set up a structure and a schedule. Once you start to set up your routine for what's going to be your new normal, this is where you need to use your mindfulness. So I have a set time I start my day, and I decided to bring that into my structure for working from remote. Is my workday will start at a certain time and end at a certain time. And then I am mindful of monitoring for that. So if I'm having my lunch break.
We may have a technical difficulty with her internet connection, so if you'll please pause and just bear with us, it will come back. Hmm, oops. Or I'm going to advance this too far and we'll be in trouble. No, we won't. Perhaps this is a moment to practice mindfulness as we are sitting here waiting for the internet to reconnect. Again, my apologies for the technical difficulty. And Dawn is back with us.
I got dropped, and that is one of the coping things that's just going on with this new normal is learning to roll with that, getting dropped in a meeting. Certainly, Zoom and the internet is not perfect in our universe.
I vamped as best I could. Now the ball is yours.
Could you move the next slide, please?
Certainly. Oops, I think.
All right. Whoops, we went to Levum. Okay. Now we need to go back. All right. So mindfulness. So living mindfully can help reduce your anxiety and depression and allow for a more adaptive reaction to the difficult situation. And part of that is just being aware of and accepting the current situation, letting go of what could or should be, and then dealing with what you have. And so that's an acceptance piece, which is an important part of it. So my anxiety and depression can go up if I get really caught up in the sense of what could, should, ought to be. Instead of working with, okay, this is what it is. This is how things are, and now what do I want to do with what is? So that's a very important skill, and it's something that's a trap we can get caught up in. You know, when I look at things that should be, my daughter should be graduating in a beautiful ceremony in May. Well, that's not going to happen. So I can acknowledge that that's sad, but then I have to figure out, well, what are we going to do instead to celebrate her? If I get too lost in what it ought to be, then that's going to ramp up my anxiety and depression. So one of the tricks to the coping skills is acknowledging what is, but then not fighting and saying, okay, now what will I do with it? Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the how-to is going to be really important, and this is where you're going to use those mindfulness skills, is to set a structure. Because structure is very soothing, it's very predictable. Most of us, you know, depending on what our work is, of course, will have how to work experience that usually sets the structure for us, a certain task or project that needs to get done, a certain time frame by which it gets done, probably a fairly predictable work day of when I start, when I stop, when I meet with my colleagues, when I meet with my team. So when we're all working from remote, or again, if you're in the office, but you're the skeleton crew in the office, because most people have been set home, the structure has gotten set aside in the traditional way. So it's really important to work on, how do you set your work hours now? What is going to be the predictability? Now, I chose with my schedule to set it fairly similar to my typical hours in the office. Depending on what your work is, you may set something that's different. Some of the colleagues in my agency have, but the idea is just have some predictability so it's not random. I'm working at all hours of the day and weekend. Set a pre-work routine. Again, that's a nice way to ease into your schedule. It establishes some normalcy. And again, it helps with that sense of what's going on. You need to learn to leave work at work. Technology can tempt us to be working at all hours of the day. And so again, just like you have a pre-work routine, what's your end of the day routine? What do you do as you wind down your day, kind of finish off the work? And here we are on Friday, will be some of us winding down for the weekend. And set your boundaries. So one of the boundaries I've encouraged my staff that I supervise to set is we've got our phones now rolling over to remote, which means that, I mean, when you're at work, you only get the calls on the day you're in your office, but now that you're at home, if you have it set up to roll over, they could come at all hours. And how do you use the technology on your phone to not have your work calls coming at all hours, that they will go back to voicemail? So just ways to be aware of it and talk about with your boss and peers how you can keep that structure going. Next slide, please. Same with your email access. One of the ways I've always helped myself control that work-life boundaries is I don't put my email on my phone. So if I'm out, I'm walking the dog, I don't have that temptation to look at my email. But whatever that boundary is, create that boundary. It's like no more, oh, one more email, one more email, one more email, but let there be a limit. You can have your supervisor help you with this if you're struggling with that structure. And if you do want to flex your hours and make some adjustment and it fits into this new normal that we're at, definitely talk that over with your supervisor. But as you create perhaps a shift in your schedule, make sure you've got some parameters around it. Next slide, please. Okay. Bottom line, this goes back to what I said about control, is control what can be controlled. So we're trying to accept what can't be controlled, which is, of course, what's going to go on with the virus. And there's so much science about that and research and politics and things that we aren't in control of, but you can control these boundaries around your work and home and personal life. And then you have to be mindful of your mental boundaries. So if you set that structure of your stop and start time, your lunch break time, and so forth, when you step away, you do step away. So if you take a lunch break and you're going outside, it's a beautiful sunny day today, and you're walking your dog, you're thinking about what's going on as you take your pleasant walk and enjoy the sunshine. It doesn't really help if you're taking your walk and you're thinking about the project you have to get to when your lunch break is over. So try to keep your mind turned on noticing that. And if you're struggling with that, one of the things you can do is talk to yourself about it. You can have like this running comment on, oh, I see the buds, I see the crocuses, I see, a couple kids riding their bike as they're walking with their mom. And you can have this inner dialogue that helps turn your mind back on to that pleasant thing you're trying to enjoy. Next slide, please.
Oops.
Oops. Okay, and then once you set those parameters around your work, when you do have your time that's not your work time, be mindful in how you care for yourself. This is a time when it can get easy to get a little bit lost in that self-care. So keep a mindset that you need that healthy lifestyle. It will really help you cope with your fears and isolation. I mean, obviously there's so much research about healthy diet, healthy exercise. So really focus on your healthy eating, stay hydrated, get your sleep, very important. Next slide, please. Make time for fun and relaxation. Try to schedule that in, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about creative ways to connect. But I've been trying to make a point of times that I'm going to meet up with my friends, and that's my fun time. And I've been trying to be very conscientious to not let that get set aside or knocked off. Try not to overschedule yourself. Do you schedule in your exercise? So whatever your exercise preference is, riding a bike, a home strength workout routine, taking a walk, make sure that that's kind of solid in your schedule. And then really work on reaching out to your support system. It can be tempting to get caught in this trap of not reaching out, especially if you're isolated, as we all are nowadays, and you have to really make a conscious effort to make sure you connect to your support system. Next slide, please. Okay, so coping, you get those healthy habits in place, but also acknowledge to yourself. It's very important to validate yourself that this is a scary time. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns. Make sure even as you're coping, it's like you're doing both things at the same time. You're acknowledging that, yes, this is scary, but push forward then with your coping skills and some of these habits that I'm talking about. And then as you push forward with your coping skills, it's going back to that work-life boundaries, is protecting the time for your friends, family, and community. Next slide, please. Okay. In your time, there's so much about COVID out there. So one of your coping skills is knowing what you need to know, but not getting so lost in the news that you move into that fear and anxiety and overwhelming sense of it. So I do encourage people to make sure that any news choice they're going for is a reputable source. So I put down here like the CDC or WHO. It could be our state government and the reports they issue. But be careful that wherever your source of news is, that it's a reputable source. But then limit the amount of time. I would recommend a little bit of news in the morning, if you so wish, a little bit of news in the evening at the end of your day, and try not to then have the rest of your day blipping over to the news. And one of the things that's different in our new normal for those of us who are using technology so much in our jobs is that it's so easy because you're on your computers perhaps more than you've been in the past to just click into a news site, and try to resist the temptation to do that. To get some knowledge, because that can be helpful with fear and anxiety, but to limit the exposure to, maybe 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes or so in the evening. Next slide, please. Okay, and then there's just so many fun and creative ways to try to stay connected with our friends and family. So we've got FaceTime, Google Hangout, Zoom, video, all sorts of video-based options. Share, of course, your fears and concerns with people you trust. Chances are they're feeling the same way, so that shared validation. I would also recommend putting a boundary around this, because otherwise it can just become hours of shared anxiety. So acknowledge concerns, share concerns, but try to have a lot of this time just be other stuff, social stuff. And there's just so many different creative ways to do it. You can, for yourself personally, take a class online. There's so many free classes now. Yale has the happiness class that they're putting free online, for example. A lot of the Ivy League schools, if you want something like that, there's yoga classes online, dance classes online, just lots of things. My daughter is in a Rubik's Cube club online. So there's lots of ways to stay connected and social, and you want to make a deliberate choice to pick things that really grab your attention and interest and pull your mind away from COVID-19 and the pandemic. And hopefully some of these might be solo, so you might pick a yoga class that's just watching something, or some of it might be things that you share with a friend who also gets online at the same time. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the things you can do together with friends online. So like a Google Hangout or a Zoom exercise together. You can do planks together, jumping jacks, just something simple. Share photos of your pets enjoying the new routine. You can make it fun. Netflix has this really fun thing where it's called Netflix Party, where you and some friends can watch the same show together at the same time remotely. And it promotes this opportunity. If one person wants to stop it and have conversation, it stops for everybody. So you can have your TV time together with friends, movie time together with friends. So that's some of the different creative ways you can do that to do that connection. Next slide, please. You can use Zoom or FaceTime for a coffee break or happy hour. I've done both. It's been a lot of fun. You can get together with your book club, knitting group. Anything you previously did together can be done through some of these mediums. It's different. I mean, certainly if you're in a knitting group, people can't have that tactile experience of seeing what you're knitting on, but you can share the time, share the feeling of community. I would say you can acknowledge that it's different. It feels a little unusual, and even acknowledge that sense of loss, that it's not quite what it was before when you're together in person, but you can still have that sense of camaraderie, that sense of connection, that sense of community. You can take a walk together while you're on the phone or Zoom, share what you see, cook together. Just anything that you creatively want to put together, use the technology to make that work. Next slide, please. A friend passed this resource on to me where you can play games together. If you go into this webpage, they have checkers, chess, Unos, apples to apples. So it's another way to connect. You get the account, you sign in, your friends sign in, and now you can play games. It's a lot of it's just about being intentional, planning your times, and making sure that it's not lost in the mix of everything else that's going on in our world. Next slide, please. And then know when to seek professional help. If you're struggling and these coping skills aren't quite coming together for you, maybe you're noticing some increased irritability, snapping, it may be time to seek help. If you're overwhelmed, if it's like you're thinking, sure, it's great to have the idea of setting a structure, but I'm so overwhelmed, I don't even know if I can get that going for me. If you're noticing that your sleep or appetite is disrupted, definitely reach out for therapy. Aurora Mental Health Center is still providing therapy. Next slide, please. And certainly we have telehealth and remote options. Although the mental health centers have options, private practice therapists are offering telehealth and remote options. So if these coping skills aren't quite coming together for you and you're struggling, there are definitely ways to get some resources and help to problem solve how to get these things more active. And that's about it. I'm ready for questions.
I'm going to stop share here. Well,
Okay.
I would never stop share in person because I absolutely love her, but that's a different story. Who can't do without a little share? If anyone has any questions, I don't see anything in the chat at this point in time, and I apologize for the technical difficulties and my slipping through slides too fast. Sorry about that, Dawn.
That's okay.
But yeah, I don't see any questions coming through right now, but I'm going to unmute our dear friend Dee Dee from the chamber, if I can. Well, yep, she's unmuted now. And see if she has anything that she would like to add at this particular moment.
The only thing I'd like to add, well, first of all, thank you, Dr. O'Neill, for that wonderful presentation. A lot of great information that we all need at this time. And I think sometimes we know these things, but the reassurance is really valuable, especially when we kind of lose track of that. So thank you so much for that. And Rick, thank you for your amazing moderation. We appreciate you.
You're welcome.
And you know, the Aurora Mental Health has collaborated with the Chamber to put on these presentations every Friday at 2 o'clock. So the link to get on is going to be the same every week. We're probably looking at doing, I think we have 5 more weeks of doing this. And who knows where this will go from here. So even if we do go back on April the 27th, which is the plan, then we will still continue to offer these Zoom meetings, because just because we're going back to work doesn't mean that everything is now all, you know, good and well and we're back to normal, because it's going to be a new normal for most of us. So we want to make sure that everybody's getting the assistance that they need in learning how to transition back in. So every week we'll be seeing new topics. So as time goes on, we'll be catering those topics to what it is, the feeling, you know, what is the feeling that people are going through at this time, so we can make sure that we're talking about that specifically. And like Dr. O'Neill mentioned earlier, if you want some specific information there, Rick, if you don't mind, in the chat, if you can just type in the Aurora Mental Health's phone number, and an email that they can get in contact with you guys if they want to speak to somebody directly. We'd love to get that information out to you as well. And I believe that Dr. O'Neill is going to have some resources that she's going to email over to me, that I'll email over to all of you, along with the recording of this session. So if you wanted to share this information with your friends, families, and coworkers, please feel free to do so, because again, we want to help out as many people as we possibly can. Rick just put in there in the notes, if you can see to everyone, their phone number is 303-617-2300, and their email is info@aumhc.org. So you can reach them directly with any additional questions. And if you have any questions, if you wanted to raise your hand or unmute yourself, or just put it in the chat, we can take you off on mute if you verbally wanted to ask that question, or if you wanted to chat it. Or again, if you wanted to ask that question privately, please feel free to contact them directly as well. Absolutely. Anything that I missed there, Rick?
I think it sounds good. One thing I want to ask Dr. O'Neill is the support line. Can you speak about the support line? Because that's kind of
Yes,
new for us.
yes, we have a support line. It's available 7 days a week. It goes from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And when you dial the 303-617-2300 number, you press 5 to get to that option. And that will get you a support person that you can chat with.
Yep.
And it can be, you know, for any kind of support that you're needing at this time.
That's
Yeah, it
really
can be
awesome.
situational in the moment, whatever. And Dr. O'Neill, I know that we pressed 5, I think, during the day. I just want to make everyone aware, but please just call the main line and then listen to those prompts to be followed to that support line, because it
Yeah.
might switch after 5. And I just want people to know that we are there. We have people there 8 to 8 waiting to talk to them.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it can be resources, it can be emotional support, it can be any topic that you wish to talk with someone about and gather ideas and resources.
Great.
And that's a good point. And if anybody has any additional topics, we do have a list of topics that Aurora Mental Health has put together. Plus, we have other guest speakers from other entities that are doing presentations throughout the week. We pretty much at this point, we have one every day. They're going anywhere, pardon me, starting from either 12, 1, some start at 11:30, but they're usually about 45 minutes to an hour long. And you have an opportunity to ask questions directly to the subject matter experts that, you know, work specifically in these fields. So if you have any other topics that you would like to hear people talk about, please feel free to email that information to me or any other feedback. And my email is dd.poole@aurorachamber.org. So that's DEEDEE.P as in Papa, OOLE @aurorachamber.org. And I'd be more than happy to speak with you and hear the feedback that you have to offer. I don't see any questions coming in at this time. Do you, Rick?
No, I do not. She was so
Okay.
good that nobody has any questions. I mean, that's a good presenter. Absolutely.
I know that we do have, let me check here and see. We do have our Executive Vice President, Rini Samard, on the line. And he's been listening in, chiming in. He's been a huge supporter of all this. Rini has pretty much been to every single one of our webinars that we've put on. Rini, would you like to say anything?
I just want to thank Rick and Dr. O'Neill for helping us. The Aurora Mental Health has been a tremendous partner and friend of Chambers for many years. So thank you for doing this and continue to support the community and support our members. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rini.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to continue the partnership. So we're very appreciative of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Dr. O'Neill or Rick, do you either have anything else to add?
I do not.
I do not at this time. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your support. And we'll look forward to that recording and the additional resources that I'll email out to our attendees.
You got it.
Okay. Thank you,
And there'll be
everybody.
an additional.
Everybody have a great weekend.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.